The money in your account doesn't exist. Not really. It's a number on a screen, a promise wrapped in code. And the moment you try to pull it all out at once, you'll discover what bankers have known for 300 years. The vault is empty. It's always been empty. But here's what should keep you awake at night. The people who create this phantom wealth don't work for governments. Governments work for them. They borrow money that didn't exist until they borrowed it. They pay interest on ghost debts forever, and they call it sovereignty. This is the architecture of the modern world, an empire built not on land, but on obligation, where the currency isn't gold or oil, but debt itself. And it begins, like all perfect cons, with a trick so simple, you'll wonder how anyone ever fell for it. London, 1694. The air thick with coal smoke and desperation. England is bankrupt. 9 years of war with France have drained every coin from the treasury. Ships rot in harbours. Soldiers desert for lack of pay. The king sits on a throne he can barely afford to heat. Then a Scottish trader named William Paterson walks into a room of desperate politicians with an offer that sounds like salvation. £1,200,000. Enough to fund the entire war. Enough to save the realm. The catch? In exchange, Paterson and his investors want something unprecedented. They want to become a bank. Not just any bank. The Bank of England, with the legal right to issue currency backed by government debt. The politicians don't fully understand what they're signing, but they're drowning. And Paterson is offering air. They sign. And in that moment, in a smoke-filled hall where ink meets parchment, the modern world is born. Not with revolution, not with conquest, but with a signature on a contract that will reshape empires. Here's what they agreed to. The bank would loan the government money created from nothing, not minted from gold, not collected from taxes, but conjured into existence as debt. The government would pay interest on that debt forever, and the bank, in return, could issue currency backed by the promise of repayment. Read that again, slowly. The government borrows money that doesn't exist, pays interest on money that was created by the act of borrowing it, and the currency in your pocket is backed by that debt. It's not a loan, it's a spell, a trick of language and law that sounds absurd when you say it out loud. But it works. Not because it's logical, because everyone agrees to believe in it. Within 50 years, every major power in Europe copies the model. Private banks discover they don't need vaults of gold anymore. They need only two things: a government desperate for funds and the legal authority to create money as debt. The goldsmiths who once guarded wealth become the bankers who conjure it, and the kings who once ruled by divine right now rule by permission of their creditors. By the 1800s, the Rothschild family perfects the system on a global scale. 5 brothers, 5 cities: London, Paris, Vienna, Naples, Frankfurt. They don't just lend to kings, they fund both sides of wars, ensuring profit regardless of outcome. When Napoleon faces Wellington at Waterloo, Rothschild gold pays for both armies. The soldiers believe they're fighting for glory, for empire, for God. But the real battle is in the ledgers, and the banks always win. So how does money actually get created? Walk into a bank tomorrow. Ask for a $100,000 loan. If your credit checks out, the loan officer nods, types numbers into a computer, and suddenly $100,000 appears in your account. Where did it come from? Not from the bank's vault, not from some depositor's savings, not from the Federal Reserve shipping cash in armored trucks. It was created in that exact moment, by your signature on a contract. The bank didn't lend you money it had. It lent you money it created by lending it to you. Your promise to repay becomes an asset on the bank's balance sheet. That asset allows the bank to create the loan. The loan becomes a deposit. That deposit can be loaned out again and again. A single dollar of reserves multiplies into $10, $20, $50 of created money rippling through the system like ghosts copying ghosts. This is fractional reserve banking. But that phrase makes it sound boring, technical, safe. Call it what it really is: the legal right to conjure money from promises. Now scale that up. Governments don't borrow 100,000. They borrow trillions. When the US Treasury needs money, it issues bonds, IOUs printed on paper and sold to the highest bidder. The Federal Reserve, a privately structured central bank, buys those bonds, not with tax revenue, not with gold, with money it creates digitally, instantly, by purchasing the debt. The government now owes money that didn't exist until it was borrowed. The bond becomes an asset. The asset backs the currency. The currency circulates as real, and the interest on that debt, hundreds of billions every year, flows quietly back to the institutions that created the money in the first place. You work for money that works for them. But here's the beautiful, terrible elegance. The system requires infinite growth. Because money is created as debt with interest attached, there is always more debt in the system than money to repay it. To pay back old loans, new money must be borrowed into existence. The machine must expand or it collapses. There is no equilibrium, only growth or crisis. Every recession is the system gasping for air. Every crash is the moment when everyone realizes the music has stopped and there aren't enough chairs. Then the central banks flood the system with new money, buy more debt, and the game continues. This isn't capitalism. It's a debt engine. And governments that never pay off their debt aren't failing. They're performing exactly as designed. World War I killed 17 million people, but it was funded by something far more efficient than bullets: debt. When the war began in 1914, Europe's empires still imagined swift, glorious victory. Soldiers would be home by Christmas. Parades would fill the streets. 4 years later, an entire generation was ash, mustard gas, trenches, machine guns turning boys into meat. But the real weapon was invisible. The banks were deciding who would survive. Britain borrowed heavily from American financiers. France borrowed from Britain. Germany sold war bonds to its own citizens, promising victory and repayment. The longer the slaughter continued, the deeper the debt. By 1917, Britain and France were on the verge of collapse, not from German guns, but from financial exhaustion. Enter J.P. Morgan, the American banker who'd been financing the Allies from the beginning. He makes it clear, if Britain and France fall, American banks lose everything. 3 months later, the United States enters the war, not to defend democracy, to protect the debt. The war ends in 1918, 10 million soldiers dead, empires shattered, but the debt remains, and it multiplies. Germany, crushed under reparations it can never pay, begins printing money to meet its obligations. The currency collapses. Hyperinflation devours savings. A wheelbarrow of marks can't buy a loaf of bread. Life insurance policies that once guaranteed security become worthless paper. The middle class is erased overnight. In that chaos, in the ashes of financial ruin, the conditions for the next war are written in invisible ink. The Treaty of Versailles wasn't a peace agreement. It was a debt trap with a 20-year fuse. Fast forward to 1944. Europe is rubble. The British Empire is bankrupt. And in a quiet resort in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, the victors design a new global order. The dollar is crowned king. Every major currency will peg to the dollar. The dollar will peg to gold. And two new institutions are born: the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Their mission officially: rebuild the world, stabilize economies, prevent another Great Depression. Their function, actually, lend to desperate nations, then control them through debt. When a country defaults, the IMF steps in with a rescue package. But rescue comes with conditions. Privatize your resources, slash public spending, open your markets to foreign investors, cut the subsidies that feed your people. It's colonialism without the colonies. Empire without the flags. Then in 1971, Richard Nixon does something unprecedented. He ends the gold standard, the dollar, and by extension, every currency tied to it, becomes pure abstraction. Money backed by nothing but military power, global habit, and the faith that tomorrow it will still be accepted. The last link between currency and physical reality is severed. Money is now entirely debt. Debt is now entirely belief. And belief is enforced by aircraft carriers. Today, global debt exceeds $300 trillion. Let that number sit in your mind. 300 trillion. That's not wealth. It's obligation. A tower of promises reaching into a sky that doesn't exist. The United States government pays more than $1 trillion per year just on interest. Not on schools, not on infrastructure, not on defense. Just interest. On money that was created by borrowing it. Japan's debt-to-GDP ratio exceeds 260%. Italy, Greece, Spain, entire nations held together by loans they'll never repay, from institutions they can't control. When Greece nearly collapsed in 2010, the headlines said it was a bailout, rescue for a failing nation. But look closer. The money didn't go to Greek citizens. It went to German and French banks holding Greek debt. The rescue was a loan to pay off a loan. Greece lost control of its own budget. Pensions were slashed. Public assets sold to foreign investors. An entire country reduced to a revenue stream for creditors. And here's the part that should make your blood run cold. The people who designed the bailout called it a success. In 2008, the global financial system nearly collapsed. Banks that had created trillions in phantom wealth through subprime mortgages, derivatives, and bets on bets on bets suddenly realized the entire structure was built on sand. Lehman Brothers fell, markets froze, the dominoes began to tip. Then governments stepped in, not to punish the banks, to save them. The United States alone spent over $16 trillion, created from nothing, naturally, to bail out the institutions responsible for the crisis. Not a single major banker went to prison. Not one. Why? Because punishing the banks would mean admitting the system itself is the crime. And the system is too big to question. The CEO of Goldman Sachs sat before Congress and was asked, "Did you bet against the very mortgages you were selling to your clients?" He smiled. "We were making markets." Translation: yes. And it was legal. So what does this mean for you, right now, in your life? It means the $50,000 you've been saving for 10 years buys what $35,000 bought when you started. The money didn't disappear. It was diluted, legally, silently, by design. Every time the central bank creates new money to buy government debt, your existing money loses value. They call it inflation and treat it like weather, something that just happens. But it's not weather. It's policy. It's theft in slow motion, so gradual you don't notice until your rent has doubled and your salary hasn't. It means your government is not sovereign in the way you were taught. It doesn't control its money supply. Central banks do. And central banks, despite their official independence, answer to the financial system they were built to serve. It means every financial crisis follows the same script. Debt expands, bubbles inflate, the bubble bursts, institutions too big to fail get bailed out with public money, and the cycle begins again, larger, more fragile, more dangerous than before. But here's the part they don't want you to understand. The entire system rests on one fragile pillar: belief. Belief that the debt will be honored, that the numbers on screens represent value, that the promises will be kept, and belief can shatter. In 2008, there was a moment, brief, terrifying, when people started asking for their money all at once, not because they needed it, because they stopped believing it would be there tomorrow. The banks didn't have it. The reserves were a fiction. Fractional reserve means there's only a fraction there. And when everyone asks for the fraction at the same time, the game is exposed. The system survived because governments stepped in and forced belief back into place. But the cracks are still there, wider now, deeper. The next time might be different. So what do you do with this information? You could panic, buy gold, hoard cash, retreat into paranoia. But that's not freedom. That's just a different cage. Or you could see it clearly. Understand that money is not a scarce resource handed down from heaven. It's a tool, a social technology, and like all technologies, it can be redesigned. The debt empire is not inevitable. It's a choice, a set of laws, contracts, and habits maintained by people who benefit from its continuation. And choices can be unmade. When people understand how money is actually created, they start asking different questions. Why should governments borrow money into existence when they could create it debt-free? Why should private institutions profit from public need? Why is infinite debt growth treated as normal when infinite ecological growth is recognized as suicide? These aren't radical questions. They're obvious ones. The only reason they sound radical is because the system has spent centuries making them invisible. The goldsmiths began the trick. The banks perfected it. The governments enshrined it. And now, 300 years later, we live inside a machine designed to turn nations into borrowers and citizens into servants of compound interest. But here's the secret. The debt empire doesn't want you to know. You're not powerless. You're just uninformed. And information is the one thing they can't repo, can't inflate, can't tax away. You still have to live in this system, pay your bills, navigate the machinery as it exists. But now you see the gears, you understand the trick, and once you see it, you can't be governed by it the same way. The money in your account still doesn't exist, but now you know why. Now you know who benefits. Now you know the empty vault has always been empty, and that everyone pretending otherwise is just performing their role in a script written centuries ago. History doesn't repeat. It reveals. The patterns are there, written in treaties and crashes and quiet meetings where the terms of the world are decided by people you'll never see. But if you understand the past, you'll see the future before it arrives. And that changes everything. The greatest trick the debt empire ever pulled wasn't convincing you it didn't exist. It was convincing you there was no alternative. Now you know better. Welcome to the other side of belief.